Christmas dinner at my grandmother's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, should have been magical. The crystal chandelier sparkled above the mahogany table, casting warm light on the perfectly arranged china. I sat between my parents, feeling grateful for this rare family gathering. Then, Grandma Eleanor, all 82 years of sharp business wisdom, looked directly at me and asked the question that shattered my world. "Still living in the house I bought you?" I froze completely. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "I don't live in any house you bought, Grandma." The words came out confused, uncertain. She turned slowly to my parents, David and Susan, and their faces drained of all color instantly. The silence stretched across the dining room like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. Uncle Thomas stopped cutting his prime rib, and Aunt Patricia's wine glass remained suspended near her lips. The only sound came from the antique grandfather clock, ticking in the corner each second, amplifying the growing tension. My father cleared his throat nervously, his usual confident demeanor cracking under Grandma Eleanor's steely gaze. "Mom, perhaps we should discuss this privately later," he suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. Privately. Eleanor's voice carried the same commanding tone she used in boardroom negotiations. "Alexander deserves to know where the $8,000 I've been sending monthly for his housing has been going for the past 10 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. $8,000 monthly. For 10 years. That amounted to nearly $1 million. I turned to stare at my parents, searching their faces for some explanation that would make sense of this revelation. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her napkin. "Alexander, sweetheart, we can explain everything," she stammered, avoiding direct eye contact. "Then explain," I said, my voice steadying despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Explain why I've been living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment in Bridgeport, working at Coffee Corner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then rushing to my second job at Artist Supply Warehouse until 8, followed by weekend catering gigs, just to afford ramen noodles and bus fare." Eleanor's expression hardened as she absorbed this information. "You've been working 3 jobs while living in poverty." The memories flooded back with painful clarity. Every time I had asked my parents for help during emergencies, they had lectured me about independence and personal responsibility. When my ancient Honda Civic died last spring, leaving me stranded 20 miles from work, I had called them desperately for a loan. My father had given me a speech about learning to manage money properly, while I stood in a gas station parking lot at midnight, calculating whether I could afford a taxi home. "David." Eleanor's voice could have frozen the champagne in our glasses. "Susan, start talking. Now." My father's confession came out in broken fragments. They had indeed received monthly payments from Eleanor's financial manager, with specific instructions that the money was designated for my housing expenses. Initially, they claimed they had planned to surprise me by purchasing a house outright once they had accumulated enough for a substantial down payment. "We wanted to teach you the value of hard work first," my mother added weakly, her carefully applied makeup now smudged with tears. "We thought if you struggled a little, you'd appreciate success more when it came." A little struggle. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I've eaten nothing but generic peanut butter sandwiches for weeks at a time. I've worn shoes with holes in them because I couldn't afford new ones. I've turned down art supplies I needed for my work because I had to choose between paints and electricity." Uncle Thomas finally spoke up, his law enforcement background evident in his measured tone. "Where exactly did that money go, David?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. My parents exchanged glances that spoke volumes about shared guilt and desperation. "We used some of it to pay down our mortgage," my father admitted reluctantly. "And there were some unexpected expenses with the house renovations, and Susan's medical bills from her surgery last year, and—" "You stole from your own son," Eleanor stated flatly, cutting through their excuses like a blade through silk. I calculated rapidly in my head. $8,000 monthly for 10 years, equaled $960,000. Nearly $1 million that should have changed my entire life trajectory. Money that could have allowed me to focus on my art instead of grinding through exhausting manual labor. Resources that might have enabled me to attend graduate school, travel to art residencies, or simply live with basic human dignity. The betrayal felt like drowning in reverse air being forced into my lungs until they might burst. These were the people who had raised me, who had claimed to love me unconditionally, who had watched me struggle financially while secretly profiting from my designated support funds. "I need to leave," I announced, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the emotional chaos raging inside my chest. "Alexander, please." My mother reached toward me across the table. "Let us explain properly. We were going to tell you eventually. We have some of the money saved in an account." "Some of it?" The phrase escaped before I could contain it. "What happened to the rest?" But I couldn't listen to more lies, more justifications, more manipulation disguised as parental concern. I grabbed my jacket from the coat closet and walked out into the Connecticut winter night, leaving behind the warmth of the mansion and the cold reality of family betrayal. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I walked aimlessly through the manicured streets of Greenwich, passing houses that probably cost more than I would earn in several lifetimes. Each step away from that dining room brought a new wave of memories, moments when I had felt ashamed of my financial struggles, times when I had apologized to my parents for not being more successful, instances when I had believed their narrative that my poverty was somehow my own fault. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, matching the emotional weather inside my cramped studio apartment. Sleep had been impossible, my mind spinning through calculations and memories trying to piece together the full scope of what my parents had hidden from me. I sat at my small folding table with a cup of instant coffee and my laptop, determined to understand the complete picture of my financial situation. I had avoided checking my credit report for years, partly from fear, and partly because I assumed it would reflect my hand-to-mouth existence. Now, with yesterday's revelations echoing in my mind, I navigated to the credit monitoring website and entered my personal information with trembling fingers. The screen loaded slowly, and when the numbers appeared, I felt the coffee cup slip from my grip, sending hot liquid across my art sketches spread on the table. My credit score was 480. Not only was it terrible, but according to the detailed breakdown, I was carrying $37,000 in credit card debt across multiple accounts I had never opened. The report listed 5 different credit cards, all maxed out, all showing payment histories dating back years. There were also 2 personal loans totaling $15,000, allegedly taken out for home improvement projects. The addresses associated with these accounts were my parents' house in Westport. My hands shook as I dialed the customer service number for the first credit card company. After navigating through automated menus and providing verification information, I spoke with a representative named Jennifer, who pulled up my account details. "Sir, I show regular charges on this account going back 4 years," she explained professionally. The most recent charges were at Home Depot, Best Buy, and several restaurants in the Westport area. "I've never had this card," I told her, my voice barely controlled. "I've never authorized any of these purchases." Jennifer paused before responding. "Sir, I have to inform you that this appears to be a case of identity theft. You'll need to file a police report and submit fraud documentation to begin the dispute process." The same story emerged with each subsequent call. 5 different financial institutions, all confirming that someone had been using my identity to obtain credit and make purchases for years. The most disturbing revelation came during my call to Northeast Community Bank, where a loan officer named Stephen Martinez agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Stephen's office was small but professional, located in a branch just outside downtown Bridgeport. He pulled up my file on his computer and turned the screen toward me, his expression grave. "Mr. Alexander," he began carefully, "I have to show you something that's quite concerning. We have surveillance footage from when this loan application was submitted." The black and white security video showed a woman approaching the loan desk, signing paperwork, and providing identification. The woman was unmistakably my mother Susan, but she was using what appeared to be identification documents bearing my name and information. She presented a driver's license with your name, but her photograph, Stephen explained. At the time, our loan processor didn't catch the discrepancy. We've since updated our verification procedures. I stared at the screen, watching my mother commit fraud in high definition. She looked confident, comfortable as if she had done this many times before. The timestamp showed the transaction had occurred 18 months ago, during a period when I had been struggling to afford groceries. "How much was this loan for?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. $8,000 secured against your parents' property as co-signers, Stephen replied. The loan purpose was listed as business equipment for art studio. Business equipment I had never received. An art studio I had never been able to afford. My parents had literally used my name and credit to finance their lifestyle, while watching me work multiple minimum wage jobs to survive. Stephen provided me with copies of all the documentation, including the forged applications and the surveillance footage. He also gave me contact information for their fraud department and suggested I consult with an attorney immediately. That afternoon, I found myself in the law offices of Marcus Thompson, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in financial crimes. Marcus was a tall, serious man in his 50s who listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Alexander," he said when I finished explaining the situation, "what your parents have done constitutes multiple felonies: identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and potentially racketeering if this pattern extends beyond your case." He explained that I could file criminal charges, which would likely result in federal prosecution given the amounts involved and the use of interstate banking systems. The penalties could include significant prison time for both parents. However, Marcus continued, "You should know that criminal prosecution might not be the fastest way to restore your credit and recover financially. The legal process could take years, and restitution in criminal cases often comes slowly, if at all." As I sat in his office, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas, I felt completely overwhelmed. 6 months ago, my biggest worry had been whether I could afford new paintbrushes. Now, I was contemplating sending my own parents to federal prison. Marcus gave me his card and advised me to think carefully about my next steps. "Whatever you decide," he said, "document everything. Keep copies of all records, save every communication, and don't confront your parents directly until you've decided on your legal strategy." I walked back to my apartment as the winter sun set early, casting long shadows across the industrial landscape of Bridgeport. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from my parents, but I wasn't ready to hear more lies and excuses. That evening, I spread all the financial documents across my floor, creating a timeline of the fraud. The pattern was clear and systematic. My parents had been using my identity to support their lifestyle for years, all while accepting money from my grandmother that was specifically intended to help me. The cruelest irony was that my art career had suffered directly from their actions. I had applied for several small business loans over the years, hoping to afford better studio space or higher quality materials. Each application had been rejected, and I had assumed it was because I lacked sufficient income or collateral. Now I understood that my credit had been destroyed before I ever had a chance to build it. As I sat surrounded by evidence of my parents' betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The confusion and hurt were crystallizing into something harder and more focused. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely angry, and that anger was beginning to feel like power. 3 days after my discovery of the credit fraud, I received an unexpected phone call from Eleanor's personal assistant, a crisp, professional woman named Catherine Williams. Eleanor wanted to meet with me privately at her estate, away from the rest of the family. She had something important to show me. I drove my borrowed car. Mine was still in the shop from a breakdown I couldn't afford to fix through the gates of the Greenwich estate, past the manicured gardens now dormant under winter's grip. Eleanor met me personally at the front door, something she had never done before in all my years of visiting. "Alexander," she said, her voice carrying an unusual warmth, mixed with something that sounded like respect. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." She led me not to the formal living room where family gatherings usually occurred, but to her private office on the second floor. The room was a testament to decades of business success: floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, original oil paintings, and a massive desk that looked like it could serve as a landing strip for small aircraft. But what caught my attention immediately was the wall of monitors displaying what appeared to be security camera feeds from throughout the house. "I suppose you're wondering about the surveillance system," Eleanor said, noting my stare. "I had it upgraded 5 years ago after some concerns about family members' behavior during my absences." She moved to her desk and opened a thick manila folder, gesturing for me to take the chair across from her. "Alexander, I need you to understand something important. I have been aware of your parents' deception for quite some time." The words hit me like cold water. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." "I suspected," she corrected. "But suspicion and proof are different things entirely. In business, you never move against someone until you have documentation that would hold up in court." Eleanor opened the folder and began spreading documents across her desk. Bank statements, canceled checks, email printouts, and what appeared to be investigative reports. 6 months ago, when you never acknowledged receiving the housing assistance I'd been providing, I began to wonder what was happening to that money. A young man in your situation should have been either grateful or at least curious about such a substantial monthly gift. She handed me a bank statement with highlighted entries. "This shows the monthly transfers to your parents' account exactly as agreed. $8,000 transferred on the 15th of every month for the past 10 years and 3 months. The next document was a private investigator's report dated 2 months ago. The investigator, Raymond Cooper, had conducted surveillance of my parents and documented their spending patterns, lifestyle, and various financial activities. Mr. Cooper discovered that your parents have been living well beyond their stated income," Eleanor continued. "David's salary as a mid-level insurance adjuster and Susan's part-time work at the library should not have supported their current lifestyle. The house renovations alone cost more than $70,000 this past year." She showed me photographs taken by the investigator, my parents driving a new BMW, receipts from expensive restaurants, credit card statements from luxury retailers, all funded apparently by money intended for my basic living expenses. But the real revelation came when Mr. Cooper investigated your grandfather's estate. Eleanor's expression hardened as she pulled out another set of documents. My grandfather, Eleanor's late husband, had died when I was 19 years old. I remembered the funeral, the family gathering, the sadness, but I had never been told anything specific about his will or estate distribution. Your grandfather left you $50,000 in his will, plus a portfolio of stocks and bonds worth approximately $120,000 at the time of his death. Those investments would be worth nearly $300,000 today. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Where is that money?" "Your parents claimed they were managing it as trustees until you turned 25. When you reached that age, they said they were waiting until you were more financially responsible. They produced documents showing you had requested they continue managing the funds." Eleanor handed me photocopies of forms allegedly signed by me, requesting that my parents maintain control of the inheritance. The signatures looked like mine, but I had never seen these documents before in my life. "More forgery," I said, staring at what appeared to be my own handwriting. "Indeed, Mr. Cooper was able to trace those funds. They were liquidated gradually over several years to support your parents' lifestyle and their various financial obligations." I felt physically sick. Not only had my parents stolen the housing money from Eleanor, but they had also taken my inheritance from my grandfather. Money that had been left specifically for me, that could have changed the entire trajectory of my adult life. "There's more," Eleanor continued, though I wasn't sure how much more betrayal I could absorb in one sitting. She turned to her computer and opened what appeared to be a video file. The screen showed the interior of my parents' kitchen, date-stamped 3 weeks ago. My mother was sitting at the table with a stack of papers, and my father was pacing back and forth. The audio was clear enough to understand their conversation. "We need to take out another loan before Eleanor gets suspicious," my father was saying. "The Christmas expenses put us behind again." "Can we use Alexander's credit one more time?" my mother asked. "That worked well for the car payment last month." "I think we've maxed out what we can do with his identity. Maybe it's time to consider the life insurance option we discussed." My blood froze. Life insurance option. Eleanor paused the video and turned to face me directly. "Your parents have taken out a life insurance policy on you without your knowledge. A $500,000 term life policy with themselves as beneficiaries. The implications were too terrible to process immediately. My parents had not only stolen from me systematically for years, but they had also positioned themselves to profit from my death. I have additional recordings from the past several months." Eleanor continued grimly. "Conversations about increasing their debt load, discussions about your financial naivety, and various schemes to extract more money from both you and me." She handed me a small digital recorder. "This contains 47 hours of audio documentation, enough evidence to support multiple federal charges and civil lawsuits." I sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the scope of my parents' betrayal. This wasn't just theft or financial irresponsibility. This was a systematic long-term fraud that had shaped my entire adult life. "Why are you showing me this?" I finally asked. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression intense. "Because, Alexander, you have two choices. You can pursue full criminal prosecution, which will likely send both your parents to federal prison for many years. Or, you can accept my alternative." "What alternative?" "Let me handle David and Susan my way, using business methods rather than criminal justice. I can recover your stolen funds, restore your credit, and ensure they never harm you again. But in exchange, I want something from you." "What do you want?" Eleanor smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "I want you to prove that you're worthy of the family legacy. I want you to show me that you have the intelligence, integrity, and strength to carry forward what your grandfather and I built." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the estate grounds. "Your parents failed my test spectacularly. Now I want to see what you're made of." Eleanor's alternative proposal was unlike anything I could have imagined. She led me from her office down a hallway I had never explored during family visits, past portraits of ancestors I'd never heard mentioned, to a door secured with an electronic keypad. "Very few people have seen what I'm about to show you," she said, entering a complex code. The door clicked open, revealing a climate-controlled room filled with artwork displayed on professional gallery walls. My artwork. I stepped into the room speechless, recognizing painting after painting that I had created over the past 2 years. Pieces I had sold through small galleries, works I had thought went to anonymous collectors who appreciated struggling artists, canvases I had priced modestly, just hoping someone would value them enough to purchase them. "You've been buying my art?" I asked, though the evidence was overwhelming. "Not just buying," Eleanor corrected, activating track lighting that illuminated the collection dramatically. "Investing in your talent through a network of intermediaries." She handed me a leather portfolio filled with documentation. Sales records, gallery receipts, auction results, and art market analysis reports. The numbers were staggering. "Over the past 2 years, through various dealers and collectors, I have purchased 43 of your paintings for a total of $437,000. I stared at the portfolio, unable to process what she was telling me. But the galleries told me they sold for much less than these amounts. "The galleries were telling you what I instructed them to tell you," Eleanor explained. "I wanted to build your market value gradually, without you becoming dependent on family wealth. The difference between what you thought you received and the actual sale prices has been accumulating in a trust fund." She showed me trust fund statements, indicating a current balance of $612,000, including investment growth and compound interest. Eleanor, I don't understand. Why would you do this secretly? Because I needed to know whether you had genuine talent, or were simply another family member looking for a handout. I also needed to protect your artistic development from the knowledge that family money was supporting your career. She walked to one of my landscape paintings, a piece I had created during a particularly difficult period, when I could barely afford canvas and paints. This piece sold at a Sotheby's auction last month for $38,000. The buyer was a collector from Switzerland, who had no idea of your family connections. Eleanor opened another section of the portfolio, revealing art magazine reviews and critical assessments of my work. Publications I had never known existed had been featuring my paintings in articles about emerging American artists. RT News included you in their 30 Under 30 list last fall, she continued. The New York Times art critic called your work hauntingly authentic in a review published 6 months ago. You have been building a legitimate reputation in the art world completely independent of any family influence. I sat down heavily in one of the viewing chairs positioned throughout the gallery space. For 2 years, while I had been struggling with poverty and self-doubt, believing my art career was failing, I had actually been succeeding beyond my wildest dreams. The gallery rejections. I asked, remembering the dozens of form letters declining to represent my work. Carefully orchestrated, Eleanor admitted. I wanted you to develop resilience and continue creating art for its own sake, not for commercial validation. Artists who succeed too easily often lose the passion that drives their best work. She introduced me to another person who had been waiting in an adjacent office, Miranda Foster, an art dealer from Manhattan, whom I recognized from magazine photos. Miranda was younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of confident presence that suggested serious business success. Alexander, Miranda said, shaking my hand warmly. I've been following your career development for 18 months. Your work has been generating significant interest among collectors and museums. Miranda spread additional documents across a conference table in the gallery space. Gallery representation contracts, exhibition proposals, and what appeared to be a schedule of upcoming shows. We've been planning a solo exhibition of your work for next spring at the Harrison Gallery in Chelsea, Miranda explained. 32 pieces, including several commissioned works that are already sold to private collectors. The Harrison Gallery was one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in New York City. I had visited their exhibitions as an art student, never imagining my work would ever be displayed on those walls. The opening reception is scheduled for April 15th, Miranda continued. We expect significant media coverage and attendance from major collectors and museum curators. Eleanor watched my reaction carefully as I absorbed this information. Alexander, your parents convinced you that you had no talent specifically to keep you dependent on them. They needed you to believe you were failing, so you would continue accepting their narrative about your life. The revelation was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Every doubt I'd had about my artistic abilities, every moment of self-criticism, when I wondered whether I was wasting my time pursuing art, every instance when I'd considered giving up and finding more stable employment had been based on deliberate deception by my own parents. But there's more. Eleanor said, her expression becoming more serious. The success I've helped create for you comes with responsibility. I want you to prove that you can handle this level of achievement without losing your integrity or your connection to what matters in life. She handed me a final folder containing property deeds, architectural plans, and development proposals. I own 43 properties across Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. Residential buildings, commercial spaces, and undeveloped land with a combined current market value of approximately $47 million. The numbers were so large they felt abstract, like discussing the distance to other planets. I am considering leaving this entire portfolio to you in my will. Eleanor continued, but first, you must prove you can successfully manage a significant project that benefits not just yourself, but your community. She showed me plans for a property in Hartford, an abandoned office building, in a neighborhood that had been struggling economically for decades. Your test is this: I will provide you with $2.5 million to convert this building into affordable housing. You have 18 months to complete the project and achieve full occupancy. If you succeed, while maintaining both quality standards and genuine affordability for working families, you will inherit my entire real estate empire. I stared at the architectural drawings, feeling completely overwhelmed. 6 hours ago, I had been a struggling artist, working 3 jobs to afford basic necessities. Now, I was being offered the chance to inherit a business empire worth nearly $50 million. Eleanor, I don't know anything about real estate development or construction management. You'll learn, she said simply. I'll provide advisors and support, but the decisions and leadership will be yours. This project will test whether you have the business acumen, ethical foundation, and practical wisdom to handle the responsibility I'm considering giving you. As I looked around the gallery at my own artwork, displayed with museum-quality care in my grandmother's private collection, I realized that this moment represented a complete transformation of my understanding of my own life. Everything I had believed about my failures, my family, and my future had been wrong. 6 months had passed since the Christmas dinner revelation, and my life had been completely reconstructed. The federal investigation into my parents' financial crimes had proceeded exactly as Uncle Thomas had predicted, with precision and devastating thoroughness. I sat in the conference room of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in New Haven, watching through one-way glass as my parents were brought in wearing handcuffs and orange jumpsuits. The moment felt surreal, like watching actors in a crime drama rather than the people who had raised me. Uncle Thomas, now revealed as FBI Special Agent Thomas Wellington, had been building a case against my parents for 3 years as part of a broader investigation into financial elder abuse patterns in affluent Connecticut families. Your case broke the investigation wide open, he explained as we reviewed the evidence files. David and Susan's methods were more sophisticated than we initially realized. The full scope of their criminal enterprise was staggering. Beyond stealing from me and Eleanor, my parents had defrauded Eleanor's elderly sister Margaret out of $63,000 by claiming they needed emergency funds for my medical expenses after a fabricated car accident. They had also convinced Eleanor's cousin William to invest $75,000 in a non-existent business venture that supposedly involved my art career. They've been running these schemes across multiple states, Thomas continued. Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. The total amount we've documented exceeds $2.8 million stolen from various family members and elderly victims. The evidence room contained boxes of documentation, forged signatures, fake medical bills, fabricated business proposals, and recorded phone conversations where my parents had impersonated various professionals to support their lies. The federal charges include wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, money laundering, and conspiracy, Thomas explained. Given the amounts involved and the interstate nature of the crimes they're looking at, 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Through the one-way glass, I watched my father's attorney explaining the plea bargain options, while my mother sat silent, her face gray with resignation. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence, they were trying to negotiate reduced sentences by claiming they had been trying to help family members through difficult financial times. The arraignment hearing was held the following Tuesday in federal court in Bridgeport. I attended, sitting in the public gallery, watching as my parents stood before Judge Patricia Morrison to hear the formal charges read aloud. David Michael Henderson and Susan Marie Henderson. Judge Morrison's voice carried absolute authority. You are charged with 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of identity theft, 8 counts of elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud across state lines. My parents pleaded not guilty on advice of their attorneys, but Thomas had warned me that this was standard procedure. The evidence was overwhelming, and plea negotiations would likely begin within weeks. Outside the courthouse, I encountered my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, who had driven up from New York for the hearing. Alexander. She said, tears in her eyes. I need you to know that I suspected something was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up. I should have protected you. Patricia explained that she had noticed inconsistencies in my parents' stories about my life and financial situation over the years. When they claimed I was doing well financially, while simultaneously asking for loans for my business expenses, she had begun to wonder what was really happening. Last Christmas, when your grandmother mentioned the housing money, I realized how extensive the lies must have been. Patricia continued. I called your Uncle Thomas the next day and told him everything I'd observed. The family network that had enabled my parents' deceptions was finally unraveling, with relatives coming forward to share their suspicions and experiences. 2 weeks later, Thomas called with news that my parents had agreed to plea bargains. David would serve 12 years in federal prison, while Susan would serve 8 years. Both would be required to pay full restitution to all victims, though Thomas warned that recovering the stolen money would take years and might never be complete. They've also agreed to cooperate with ongoing investigations into similar fraud rings, Thomas explained. There are apparently other families running comparable schemes targeting elderly relatives across New England. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following month, and Thomas asked whether I wanted to provide a victim impact statement to the court. It's your choice, he said. You can speak directly to the judge about how their crimes affected your life, or you can submit a written statement, or you can choose not to participate in that part of the process at all. I spent days writing and rewriting my statement, trying to capture not just the financial damage, but the emotional and psychological impact of living for years, believing I was a failure when success had been deliberately hidden from me. The day of the plea hearing, I stood at the podium in Judge Morrison's courtroom and read my statement aloud, while my parents sat at the defendant's table, unable to meet my eyes. Your Honor, I began. The defendants didn't just steal money from me. They stole my confidence, my opportunities, and my understanding of my own capabilities. They convinced me I was worthless while profiting from my designated support funds. They damaged my credit while building their lifestyle on my grandfather's inheritance. Most significantly, they created a foundation of lies that shaped my entire adult life. I looked directly at my parents for the first time since the Christmas dinner confrontation. I've learned that forgiveness is possible, but trust must be earned through consistent actions over time. David and Susan Henderson will need to demonstrate genuine change and accountability before our family relationship can ever be rebuilt. Judge Morrison accepted their guilty pleas and imposed the agreed-upon sentences. My parents would be transferred to federal facilities within 30 days, beginning prison terms that would effectively end their freedom for the next decade. As court security led them away, my mother finally met my eyes and mouthed the word sorry. Whether she was apologizing for the crimes or for getting caught, I couldn't tell. Walking out of the courthouse into bright October sunshine, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete clarity about my family relationships and my own worth. The people who had raised me were criminals who had systematically exploited my trust, but their actions no longer had power over my self-perception or my future. Uncle Thomas walked with me to the parking garage, his expression mixing relief with concern. "How are you processing all of this?" he asked. "Honestly, I feel free," I replied. For the first time in my adult life, I understand what actually happened to me and why. I can finally move forward without constantly questioning my own judgment or abilities. The criminal justice system had provided closure, but more importantly, it had validated my reality and confirmed that my struggles hadn't been caused by personal failings or lack of effort. 18 months after the federal courthouse confrontation, I stood in the lobby of the Harrison Gallery in Chelsea, surrounded by 32 of my paintings displayed under professional gallery lighting. The opening reception for my solo exhibition had drawn in crowd that exceeded Miranda Foster's most optimistic projections. The New York Times art critic, Jonathan Weber, stood before my largest piece, a landscape series I had created during my darkest period of financial struggle. He was taking notes and speaking quietly with a museum curator from the Whitney. The authenticity in these works comes from genuine hardship, transformed into artistic vision, I heard him say. Henderson's technique combines classical landscape traditions with contemporary emotional rawness that's become increasingly rare in today's art market. Miranda approached me with a satisfied smile, holding a red dot sheet indicating sold pieces. 28 of the 32 paintings had been purchased during the first 2 hours of the reception. Alexander. I've never seen response like this for a first solo show, she said. We have a waiting list for your next collection, and the Guggenheim has inquired about including you in their Emerging Artists exhibition next year. The financial success was gratifying, but more meaningful was the validation that my art resonated with people who had no knowledge of my personal story or family connections. These buyers were responding to the work itself, not to any external narrative. Eleanor moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to exclusive events, but I noticed her pausing longer than usual at each painting, studying details with genuine interest, rather than polite family obligation. You've developed considerably as an artist, she told me during a quiet moment between conversations with collectors. The emotional depth in these recent pieces surpasses your earlier work significantly. We stepped outside onto 23rd Street, away from the reception crowd so she could share an update on the Hartford housing project that had been my primary focus for the past year. The construction is ahead of schedule and under budget, she reported with obvious pride. Your decision to hire local contractors and source materials from Connecticut suppliers has generated considerable goodwill in the community. The affordable housing project had become more complex and rewarding than I had anticipated. Working with project manager Sarah Mitchell and architect Kevin Walsh, I had learned about zoning regulations, construction timelines, tenant screening processes, and the intricate balance between financial sustainability and genuine community service. The City Council meeting next week will be interesting, Eleanor continued. Council member Robert Hayes has been organizing opposition based on concerns about property values and neighborhood character. Hayes represented the wealthier section of Hartford and had been publicly critical of the affordable housing initiative, claiming it would attract undesirable elements to the area. His opposition had forced me to attend multiple public hearings, defending the project's design standards and tenant selection criteria. I've been thinking about Hayes's concerns, I told Eleanor as we walked toward her car. What if we invited him and his constituents to tour the building before the council vote? They could see the quality of construction and meet some of the prospective tenants. Eleanor's expression brightened. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking this project requires. Show them that affordable housing doesn't mean substandard housing. The following week, I organized a comprehensive tour for city council members and neighborhood representatives. The 42 apartment units were nearly complete, featuring modern appliances, high-quality finishes, and thoughtful design details that rivaled market-rate housing in more expensive areas. The prospective tenants I introduced included Maria Santos, a single mother working 2 jobs as a nurse's aide while studying for her RN degree; James Mitchell, a military veteran attending community college on the GI Bill; and Dorothy Richardson, a retired teacher whose Social Security payments couldn't cover market-rate rent in a safe neighborhood. These are exactly the kinds of residents any community should be proud to welcome. I told the tour group, as we concluded in the community room with coffee and pastries provided by local businesses. Councilmember Hayes approached me privately after most of the group had left. Mr. Henderson, he said, his tone noticeably different from his previous opposition, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about this project based on political prejudices, rather than examining the actual proposals and standards you've maintained. 2 weeks later, the City Council voted unanimously to approve the final occupancy permits. The grand opening celebration was scheduled for the following month, with representatives from the mayor's office, local media, and community organizations planning to attend. Eleanor's test was nearing completion, But I had discovered that the real education wasn't about real estate development or construction management. The project had taught me about leadership, community responsibility, and the complexity of creating positive change in systems that often resist innovation. "There's something else we need to discuss," Eleanor said as we drove back to Greenwich after the council vote. "The full terms of my will and what inheriting my properties would actually mean for your future." That evening in her office overlooking the estate grounds, Eleanor opened a thick legal document and began explaining the complete scope of what she was considering leaving to me. 47 properties with a combined current market value of $63 million, including appreciation over the past year, she began. Plus, liquid investments, business holdings, and a foundation account designated for charitable activities. The numbers still felt abstract, but Eleanor's next statement brought the reality into sharp focus. "Alexander, if you inherit this portfolio, you'll be responsible for housing nearly 800 families across 4 states. Property management, maintenance, tenant relations, financial planning, and strategic development will become your primary occupation." She showed me detailed reports on each property occupancy rates, maintenance schedules, tenant demographics, and long-term development plans. "This inheritance comes with the obligation to continue our family's tradition of providing quality housing at fair prices," Eleanor continued. "It's not wealth for personal luxury. It's a business enterprise with significant social responsibility." I studied the property profiles, beginning to understand the scope of what she was offering. This wasn't just money or real estate. It was a legacy of community involvement and ethical business practices that would shape the rest of my life. "The Hartford project was designed to test whether you understand this responsibility," Eleanor explained. "Your decisions about construction quality, tenant selection, and community engagement showed me that you're capable of balancing profit with purpose." As winter settled over Connecticut, I found myself dividing time between completing my art commissions and learning the complexities of property management. Eleanor had introduced me to her business managers, attorneys, and property supervisors, all of whom would continue working with me if I inherited the portfolio. "Your grandmother has built something remarkable," property manager Linda Davidson told me during a tour of the company's offices in Stamford. "These properties provide stable housing for families who might otherwise struggle with housing costs, while maintaining financial sustainability that allows for ongoing investment in improvements and expansions." The education was intensive and occasionally overwhelming, but I discovered genuine interest in the challenge of creating housing solutions that served both community needs and business viability. My art career would continue, but it would be balanced with responsibilities that extended far beyond personal creative expression. 2 years after that transformative Christmas dinner, I stood in the community room of the Hartford Affordable Housing Complex, looking out at faces that represented the culmination of everything I had learned about responsibility, justice, and the power of second chances. The grand opening celebration had exceeded all expectations. Mayor Jennifer Walsh stood at the podium, addressing an audience of resident city officials, community leaders, and local media representatives who had gathered to commemorate the completion of the project. When Alexander Henderson first proposed converting this abandoned office building into affordable housing, the mayor said, "Some people questioned whether a young art gallery owner could successfully manage such a complex development project. Today, we can see that vision, determination, and genuine commitment to community service can overcome any skepticism." The 42 families who now called this building home represented the diversity and resilience of Hartford's working-class community. Maria Santos had completed her nursing degree and secured a position at Hartford Hospital. James Mitchell had graduated from community college and started a small business providing technology support to local nonprofits. Dorothy Richardson had become the building's unofficial grandmother figure, organizing social events and supporting younger residents with childcare and mentoring. This project succeeded because Alexander made a fundamental choice. The mayor continued, prioritizing community benefit over maximum profit. The rents here are 30% below market rate, but the quality and amenities exceed what most residents could afford elsewhere. Eleanor sat in the front row, her expression mixing pride with satisfaction. At 84, her health had been declining, but she had insisted on attending this celebration, despite her doctor's concerns about her energy levels. After the mayor's remarks, I stepped to the podium to address the crowd. Looking out at faces that had become familiar over the past months, I felt the weight of what this project had taught me about leadership and social responsibility. When my grandmother first challenged me to prove I could handle this development project, I thought she was testing my business skills or construction knowledge. I now understand she was actually evaluating something much more important, whether I would choose to use resources and opportunities to benefit others, not just myself. I gestured toward the residents scattered throughout the audience. Every decision we made during this project came down to a simple question: what choice would create the most good for the most people while maintaining financial sustainability for the future? The financial success had been significant, but not maximum. By choosing slightly lower rents and higher construction quality, we had created a waiting list of potential tenants and established a reputation that would benefit future projects. More importantly, we had demonstrated that affordable housing didn't require sacrificing quality or community standards. Next month, we'll be breaking ground on a second Hartford project. I announced converting an abandoned warehouse into 68 units of workforce housing, designed for teachers, firefighters, police officers, and other public service employees who deserve to live in the communities they serve. The applause was sustained and enthusiastic, but I noticed Eleanor's expression changing from pride to something more complex. After the formal program concluded, and most guests had moved to the reception area, she asked me to step outside with her. The October evening was crisp and clear with the first hint of approaching winter in the air. Eleanor moved slowly, using the walking cane she had reluctantly accepted over the summer. "Alexander," she said, her voice carrying the weight of important information, "there's something I need to tell you about my health situation." My heart sank, recognizing the tone that usually preceded difficult news. "The doctors have given me a prognosis of 6 to 8 months. She continued with characteristic directness. "Pancreatic cancer diagnosed last month. I've chosen not to pursue aggressive treatments that would compromise my remaining time without significantly improving the outcome." I felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet, though this time the instability came from impending loss rather than betrayal. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Is there anything we can do? Other doctors, different treatments, experimental options." "I've consulted with the best oncologists in the country," she replied calmly. "The diagnosis is definitive, and I'm comfortable with my decision to focus on quality of life rather than extending quantity through painful procedures." We walked slowly around the building's perimeter, past the playground equipment installed for residents' children, and the community garden plots that would be planted next spring. "This project proved everything I needed to know about your character and capabilities," Eleanor continued. "You successfully balanced competing priorities, managed complex relationships, and created something that will benefit people for decades to come." She stopped walking and turned to face me directly. "My will has been updated to reflect my final decision. You will inherit the complete property portfolio, the liquid assets, and the foundation accounts. Total value approaching $78 million, including market appreciation over the past 2 years." The magnitude of the inheritance was still difficult to comprehend, but I had learned enough about the business to understand the responsibilities that accompanied such wealth. "I've also established a board of advisors to support your transition into full leadership," Eleanor added. "Linda Davidson will continue as property manager. Marcus Thompson has agreed to serve as legal counsel, and Miranda Foster will help you balance your art career with business obligations." Over the following months, as Eleanor's health declined gradually but steadily, I spent increasing amounts of time learning the final details of the business operations and her philanthropic vision. She had been supporting educational scholarships, community development projects, and arts organizations throughout New England for decades. Wealth without purpose becomes a burden rather than a blessing, she told me during one of our last substantive conversations. Your parents failed to understand this principle. They saw money as something to acquire and consume, rather than something to steward for the benefit of others. Eleanor passed away peacefully on a snowy February morning, surrounded by family members, including Uncle Thomas, Aunt Patricia, and myself. Her final words spoken to me privately the evening before were simple and clear. Make me proud and make a difference. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Eleanor's business practices and philanthropy. Tenants from dozens of properties, scholarship recipients, arts organizations, and community leaders came to pay their respects to someone who had used wealth as a tool for creating positive change, rather than personal luxury. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through the federal prison system. My father had written from his facility in Pennsylvania, expressing what appeared to be genuine remorse for his actions and their impact on my life. Alexander. The letter read, I know that apologies cannot undo the harm we caused, but I want you to know that your success and integrity have forced me to confront the selfishness and dishonesty that guided my choices for too many years. Watching you build something meaningful, rather than simply pursuing wealth, has shown me what I should have taught you, instead of the lies and manipulation you endured. He went on to describe his participation in prison programs focused on financial responsibility and victim restitution, and his hope that we might eventually rebuild some form of relationship based on honesty and accountability rather than exploitation. My mother's letter arrived 2 weeks later, shorter, but seemingly more authentic in its acknowledgement of responsibility. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I chose short-term comfort over long-term integrity, she wrote. You deserve so much better than the parents you received, but I hope someday you can forgive the people we were and give us the chance to become the people we should have been all along. I found myself capable of forgiveness, though not trust. Forgiveness, I had learned, was something I could choose for my own emotional well-being, independent of whether my parents had truly changed or would remain the same people they had always been. Today, 3 years after that Christmas dinner confrontation, I divide my time between managing the property portfolio, creating art, and expanding the affordable housing initiative that began with the Hartford Project. We've completed 4 additional developments and have plans for 6 more over the next 3 years. My art continues to sell well, though the financial pressure has been completely removed. I paint now because the creative process feeds something essential in my spirit, not because I need the income to survive. The foundation Eleanor established has grown to support educational programs, arts initiatives, and housing developments across New England. We provide scholarships for students pursuing careers in public service fund, after-school programs in underserved communities, and support arts education in schools that have lost funding for creative programs. Most importantly, I've learned that true wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you create for others. Eleanor's test wasn't really about proving I could develop real estate successfully. It was about discovering whether I would use resources and opportunities to lift others up, rather than simply advancing my own interests. The affordable housing projects serve families who work essential jobs, but struggle with housing costs in an increasingly expensive economy. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, social workers, and small business owners now have access to quality housing they can actually afford, which allows them to focus their energy on serving their communities, rather than constantly worrying about rent payments. I think about my parents, sometimes serving their federal sentences, and participating in programs designed to address the thinking patterns that led to their criminal behavior. I hope they discovered genuine remorse and personal growth, though their choices during my childhood and early adulthood taught me that people's actions matter more than their words or intentions. The most profound lesson from this entire experience has been understanding the difference between authentic success and the superficial appearance of prosperity. My parents had nice cars, expensive clothes, and a beautiful house, but they achieved these things through deception and exploitation. Eleanor, by contrast, lived comfortably, but not extravagantly, using her wealth primarily as a tool for creating opportunities and solving problems for other people. Real success, I've learned, comes from building something that continues to create value even when you're not actively involved. The housing developments will serve families for decades. The scholarship recipients will use their education to serve their communities and support their own families. The businesses we've supported will continue providing employment and economic development in areas that need both. As I write this sitting in my office overlooking the latest affordable housing project under construction in New Haven, I'm reminded daily that every person deserves the opportunity to build a stable, dignified life for themselves and their families. Economic inequality and housing costs have made this increasingly difficult for working families, but creative solutions and committed community leadership can make a meaningful difference. Tomorrow, I'll be meeting with the mayor of Bridgeport to discuss converting an abandoned factory complex into mixed-income housing that would serve both young professionals and working families. Next week, I'm traveling to Boston to explore partnerships with local artists who want to create live workspaces that make arts careers more financially sustainable. The work continues, but it feels like purpose rather than obligation. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just financial assets. It was the understanding that privilege comes with responsibility and that the most fulfilling life is one dedicated to making things better for others. Have you ever discovered that your greatest challenges were actually preparing you for opportunities you couldn't have imagined? I'd love to hear your stories about overcoming family betrayal or finding your true purpose after difficult setbacks. Please share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate you liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear about the power of perseverance and integrity. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark your current situation might seem, there's always the possibility for justice, growth, and a future filled with purpose and meaning.